If your only definition is more is better than less, and then you give people the opportunity to visibly do work at every moment of their life, those two things don't play well together. Yeah. And I think that's why we get this burnout epidemic that just starts in the early 2000s, and it just goes, and then the pandemic sort of pushes people over the edge, and they're saying enough.
There's a Latin expression, you probably know it. You know, festina lente?
Yeah. I wrote about it.
Is it in the book?
I don't know if it's in the book. I wrote an essay about it, though. Someone sent it to me. This is very Ryan Holiday.
What's the Emperor Hadrian's favorite expression?
I looked up all the different extant artwork.
Yeah.
The festive lente artwork, all the different diagrams, the pictures that people would use for it.
It means make haste slowly. I thought that's the essence of the idea of slow productivity, right?
Yeah.
Which is that sometimes rushing is the slowest way to do it, and sometimes going slowly is the fastest way to do it.
Yes, exactly. See, I think I came across it after I wrote the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. I was like, man, we could have had this right up front. I could have been talking about Hadrian. It'd be great. Yeah.
Well, no, you think that cramming it all in or like working very hard on it is going to be the deciding variable, but oftentimes it's like it's a singular idea or a breakthrough or a new way of looking at it that solves the whole problem or allows you to go forward. So if you don't have that, there was no point in doing any of the things before. And then also, once you have that, things tend to go very quickly.
Well, also this idea that you can throw a lot of busyness at something, that's modern.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is why in the book I do a lot of older stories, because, my contention is, look at people who use their brain to create things historically.
Yeah.
They tended to have a huge amount of autonomy and flexibility.
Yeah.
Which meant they could experiment. Like, what works, what doesn't work. If I'm Galileo, if I'm Marie Curie, if I'm George O'Keeffe, I have flexibility. So what works, what doesn't work. They can figure that out. Right?
Yeah.
Then you can isolate those ideas and say, how do we adapt these now to, like a modern world, modern jobs? So if you go back and study these traditional knowledge workers, the idea that you would just be getting after it in a sort of modern 2020s email all day long, let's hop on call since, just didn't compute. They took their time.
Yeah.
Right? They were making haste slowly, because when you zoomed out, their production was incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
When you zoomed in, they would look by modern standards like they're lazy.
Well, yeah, it seems like they're laying on their back looking at the trees, or they're taking long lunches or long walks, and this all seems like it's not work.
Yeah.
But if in doing that you have the idea that unlocks the work or allows you not to burn out while doing the work, or you have the conversation that inspires, that's where the work is being done.
And sometimes just the time required, it's not even a breakthrough, just to mature something.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is Lin-Manuel Miranda, his first play, In the Heights, right? Which is a little overshadowed, but it won 8 Tonys, right? I mean, big deal play.
Yeah.
He first wrote that in college. He was a sophomore at Swarthmore. He put it on, right? It wasn't very good, that first version. It took him 7 years from there to it actually having its debut on the stage. And if you look at those 7 years, he was working on it steadily, but not intensely. So they would come back to it. He was working with a couple of alums from Swarthmore who had a theatrical company. And what they would do is, on a regular basis, we're going to bring in actors and we're going to read your latest version of the book.
Yeah.
But then a couple months will go by, and then we're going to bring him back. So you have to keep working on it.
Yeah.
Keep maturing this. But he was also doing a lot of other things, right? He was touring with his freestyle rap group, Love Supreme. He was writing a restaurant column. He was substitute teaching. But he had to take that time because he was 22. Right?
Yeah.
Like he wasn't ready. If he just said, I'm going to just go after it, I'm going to go into debt, spend 6 months after college, let's make this play work, it wouldn't have worked. He needed 7 years, coming back to it again and again as he matured creatively, the play matured, and then when it was ready to go, it really popped off. And then it was a really quick year of development, and this thing was on Broadway.
In Discipline is Destiny, I contrast these two Civil War generals. There's George McClellan, who's sort of always preparing. He said he never had enough supplies.
Never fought, though.
Yeah, and he would never sort of do the thing.
Yeah,
he would get started. He'd start moving, and then there'd be some breakdown. It would take him like 5 days to cross the river. Lincoln said he's got the slows, right? And so So you would think, like his the contrast would be like the one who's always aggressive, always moving, and it is. But I was really interested in this General George Thomas, who they called him Old Slow Trot, and he was seemingly slower than McClellan in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But when he was preparing or revving up, he was actually doing that.
Yeah.
Right? McClellan was using it as an excuse. He didn't actually believe he could win once he was in motion. He was hoping, he kept believing there would be this one singular decisive battle that would decide everything. And then also, I think, deep down, he didn't actually want the North to win the Civil War. He wanted some sort of negotiated settlement that would preserve slavery. But the point is, it was all kind of for show.
Yeah.
And then he didn't have he didn't have the killer instinct to finish the thing. And Old Slow Trot, General Thomas, he was equally, if not slower, to get going. But once he got going, he didn't stop. And I think that's sometimes when we look at artists or whatever, we go, oh, they're just like procrastinating or thinking or planning. And they actually could be doing that. That might be what they're doing. So there's a difference between this sort of I'm just waiting for all the conditions to be right. And then the person who actually is not saying I'm waiting for the conditions to be right, but making the right conditions. And then when they have everything they need, it actually happens.
Yeah, I like the metaphor. Right. Yeah. You're making progress towards the objective. It might be slow, but it's actually progress. And that's Lin-Manuel Miranda, if we go back to that example. He wasn't just sitting there in those 7 years thinking, I'm letting it marinate, but one day soon, I'm going to write this play and make it right. He was working. They kept doing different shows, and they would, goes through a lot of the different stories.
Yeah.
Pretty systematically figuring out what's not working.
Yeah.
We tried this is not working. How do we fix that? What unlocked that particular play was Miranda was good at the music. They're doing something innovative with the music, but the book wasn't very good. And they eventually brought in another playwright, and she was fantastic. She went on to win her own Pulitzer in 2012 for a completely different play. They brought in the talent when they figured out, this isn't what was working, right? Then he met his music director. Okay, now things are really starting to, but you don't get there unless you're I'm slowly but steadily. Let's try. Yeah. This isn't working. Let me try that. That is working. Let me do a little bit more. This is a little bit short. Well, what's the best way to fix it? Well, let's find out. This might take us a year to figure out how does one fix this. So you never stop. But I like slow trot as a metaphor. You could be going what seems to be slowly in the moment, but you're advancing on that territory bit by bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have been working on a play for 7 years.
Yes.
And it's exactly the same as it was when they started.
Yes.
And there's a difference between working and working.
Yeah. Well, I use myself as an example. I decided when I was 20, all right, what am I going to do? Computer science writing, right? And I sort of knew what that meant, what I wanted that to be. My entire 20s are just slow trot, right? I'm writing paperback original books that aren't at the time making a big splash, but I'm honing the craft. I'm in grad school, right?
Yeah.
So everyone goes to grad school, but I'm honing the craft, right?
Sure.
It's not really till I get to 30 that anything I think that would be impressive to the outside world happens. My first sort of real hardcover idea book, front table book comes out when I'm 30. I get hired as a professor when I'm 30, right? So it's 10 years. I never stopped.
Right.
Writing the next book. I'd take it on magazine commissions where I would try to polish specific writing skills I thought I wanted to improve, trying to as an academic, build those skills, publish new papers. Now try to publish papers that win awards. It's slow and steady.
Right.
Nothing flashy. I wasn't getting involved in other new media. I waited to get involved in new media till after all of that was established. Sure. I wasn't starting companies. I took that 10 years. And then after that 10 years, things are kind of clicking and interesting options begin to pop up.
But what's weird about that is it's sort of the same contrast you mentioned earlier, which is day to day, it doesn't look like they're being productive. But then you look at the output and very clearly they were.
Yeah.
So you're like, my 20s, I'm just, blah, 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 it's slow. But then to be a professor at 30 is an accomplishment in and of itself. To publish your first book by 30 in and of itself, people you're so young, right? So there's this weird thing where it doesn't seem like you're being productive or you're, operating quickly or sort of beating the curve. But then when the results come in, it actually does look that way. So it's this weird contrast where, the day-to-dayness of it you can't see where it's leading, but it is leading where you want it to go.
I mean, it's a time scale issue, right?
What does that mean?
Like what time scale am I measuring productivity on? So when you say, I'm measuring productivity in my 20s on the decade time scale, like I want to look back at my 20s and say, I'm proud of what I did in my 20s.
Yeah.
That makes a random Tuesday seem a lot different than if your productivity time scale is like this week I want to get after it.
Yeah.
Right? So if that's your time scale, you're like I better fill today. And then you're going to start coming up with activities that's going to allow you to be busy, right? Because I need to be productive today. So, okay, if I add this into my life and that into my life and have a bunch of coffees with other people and go through all these ideas, then I'm going to feel productive on the daily scale. But when you get to the 10-year scale, you're going to say, I had a lot of sort of like ventures and things and this and that, and then nothing really added up. So, I mean, a lot of this, it's a time scale issue.
I was thinking about that the other day because I was dropping my son off at school and it was sort of taking longer than usual. And I like to be like sitting at the desk and writing by like 9-ish. And by 9-ish, I mean like 9.
Yeah.
And so like, it was like, okay, this is going to be one of those like 9:15, like 9:30 days because this thing was out of my, and so I started to feel like not insecure, but I felt like rushed or anxious about like, I have to get this thing over so I could do this other thing because I can't be late, whatever. And then I was like, okay, but what if I, instead of thinking about this like today, like what time am I supposed to be sitting there writing? What if I just think about where I'm going to be at the end of having written the book? And I won't be sweating whether I was there 5 minutes early or 10 minutes early or 20 minutes later, even if I skip today entirely and I just, decide to do this family thing. And so that was like helpful. It's like, okay, it just, let me turn down the stakes here and just think about it in light of a larger timescale. Yeah. At the same time, that's also the logic that people who don't get things done tell themselves. They go, oh, today doesn't matter. Yeah. Like the goal I set in my head or the commitment I made, it doesn't matter. And so I think it's a tricky balance for people because you can say like, look at it in terms of decades. That's also a way to let yourself off the hook right now. Yeah,
but I think this is the key challenge of doing impressive work, right? So if you doubt your ability at this moment to be able to balance those two things, tomorrow doesn't matter, but what I do this month does, right? Like a typical writer's mindset, right? It doesn't matter if I can't write tomorrow as long as I write enough this month. If that feels like it's going to be a challenge, you're not ready to be going after what you're doing. And now there's ways you build up to get ready for it. So it's why one of the 3 principles in the book is obsess over quality, which at first feels a little bit orthogonal to slow productivity. The other things are directly connected to pace and workload, but it's actually critical for all the other things to happen, because if you train yourself to understand what's quality in my field, you systematically work on your craft, you build that obsession with quality, you don't have the problem of I'm not able to write today and I'm going to use this as an excuse, because you're obsessed with I want to write something really good. This is what I do. What's going to make me happy is having finished this chapter this month. You probably feel the same way I do. When I can't write for a few days, there's a compulsion of like I can't wait to get back and like the work on this. And so I put that in the book, because this, I think, is a problem a lot of people face. If you just jump right into, like, I'm going to be the greatest whatever, and now you're procrastinating all the time, that might be an honest signal from your brain, which is like, we're not really ready to do this.
Yeah, I find that, like, if I'm, like, what they call writer's block, like, when I'm sitting down and I'm like, I don't know what to do today, or I don't know what to say, it's really that I just haven't done the research. Like, if I have gathered the materials necessary to do the thing, doing the thing is easy. Yeah. When I have taken shortcuts or phoned it in or, rushed things, then I'm like, I don't know. Like that. So Stephen Pressfield obviously talks about the resistance. Sometimes it's not the resistance. Sometimes it is a signal that your intuition is picking up that there's a less fun part of the process that you have to go back to first.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. It's a way your mind is saying you're not really prepared to do what it is that you're actually about to do. I mean, I used to get upset about this exact issue when early in my career as a professor, they would have me come talk at what are called dissertation boot camps. It's like doctoral students, as they get closer to writing their PhDs, the grad school at various colleges will often have these boot camps
to teach you how to write your thesis.
Yeah, and also to motivate each. Like we'll all get together and you write, like you have writing sessions, and then you have speakers come in. And so like when Georgetown learned about my older books, they're like, hey, you should come and talk.
Yeah.
And so I would talk at these boot camps. But I would get so frustrated because the only verb they would use for work on the dissertation was writing.
Right.
You got to get your writing hours in. How many pages did you get in? How many words did you get in? And I would always come in and sort of give this righteous speech of like, well, writing is part of it, but what about the thinking?
What do you have to say?
Yeah. That I mean, it's not just sitting down and writing. Sure. Don't make that the verb. If you really want to be a professional thinker, which is what these students were trying to do, you have to have a much more sophisticated relationship with thought.
Yeah.
You know? Now, I was a mathematician essentially, so writing was really kind of the last step of that type of dissertation. Like by far the harder part was solving the proofs. The write up the proof was not. So I had this extreme vision of it that I was trying to generalize. But so we can't. The writing is expressing an idea. That idea has to be interesting and right. And how you form that idea. Some of it happens on the page, but you also have to think.
I think very little of it happens on the page. I think this is a much more generalizable thing than maybe you're giving yourself credit for, because people are, it's like, look, you don't just start building a house. Like you have plans for the house first, you know where everything goes, and you know all the materials that you need first. You don't just start like sawing boards and hammering stuff and pouring cement.
Here's my shitty first draft of my house. All right, now I'm just going to like fix the walls. Yeah.
You have to crack the whole thing. And that's not to say, like, look, you design the house, and then maybe later you're like, actually, hey, we got to move the refrigerator over here because like these doors are hitting each other. So, like there are going to be specific granular problems that you can really only wrap your head around once you're in the middle of doing those things. It's a, that's a much later in the process problem. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But if you don't have a sense of the whole, and you don't have a sense of how the large pieces, like nobody does a puzzle. Like there's this funny scene I remember in that show New Girl, where this guy loves doing puzzles, and he's like, I think I figured out what it's gonna be. Like he
without the box.
Yeah. He was like, wait, you don't look at the box first? He's like, you're just no, like you're making this. And like obviously that might be a more intellectually challenging way to do a puzzle, but it's also insane. Like if you sit down to write a book or start a company or and you don't know what it is that you're doing, you're just like, how can you know what the next right thing is?
You know who I think ruined this for people? It's novelists.
Okay.
Because a lot of novelists do this.
Yes.
Right. So it's the one type of writing. In fact, I'm surprised the extent to which novelists do this. A lot of novelists excavate the story as they write. So Stephen King famously does this, right? He talks about that in On Writing. But a lot of literary novelists do it as well. They don't plan it out. I was talking to a thriller writer who writes mysteries, right? You would think a mystery writer needs to understand in advance, like this is the twist. No, she just rocks and rolls. She's like, I figure it out. I figured it out as I go along, right? So I think this has pervaded culture. So anything that's adjacent to writing, we're thinking about Stephen King on writing. I'm just going to.
We think of the musician writing the song in 7 minutes, but we're not thinking of like Taylor Swift who thinks not just in terms of this album and the next album, but how these Easter eggs and this song connected. Like the best stuff is for the most part not stream of consciousness. And the fantasy is of course that it is, but it's almost never that way. And even the novelists, I bet you could have sat down and had conversations with them, and they would have told you more or less where they thought it was going.
Because they've done it enough that they're probably just internalizing outlining. But like inside their head, like, I know what the third act beat's going to be. And, this guy, okay, let me set him up now because I want to twist him to be the MacGuffin.
Or maybe once you have developed characters who have a logic or a set of values, you have effectively outlined the project because it is clear what they would do in a situation, right? And you can talk to novelists or TV writers or whatever, and they're like, well, they would never do this. Or Jim would never do this to Pam. Or of course, the show is going to end with this relationship or this action, right? Kendall was never going to be the CEO, right? Like, this, they know the stuff because they have developed the the ethos of the people.
Yep.
And then that's deterministic.
But this is Lee Child, right? He knows what Jack Reacher, because someone wrote a book about how Lee Child writes his books. I don't know if you've seen this book before.
No,
yeah, it's really fantastic. He spent a year following Lee Child while he wrote a Jack Reacher novel, and then wrote a book about it. It's all really interesting. But he knows Jack Reacher so well.
Yes.
That, yes, he doesn't have to. He has to come up with a setup.
A plot.
Yeah. And then every time a scenario happens, like, I know exactly what Jack Reacher is going to do here.
Yes.
You know, like, he's not going to get beat up.
Yeah.
He's not going to be a wuss. He's going to probably crack some skulls, and, you know, we know what he cares about, what he doesn't. You know, but I think something that was an advantage for me that I then try to convey when other people are thinking about creative processes. So going back to the idiosyncratic field in which I came up in. So coming up in theoretical computer scientist, you know, before I became a known writer, mainly I was doing applied mathematics. The core of that is proofs. And there's this feeling that our brain is wired for when the pieces click together.
Yes.
So you get very familiar with this feeling of the pieces have clicked together. Oh, that works. Even if you haven't worked out all the steps, it's like, boom, right? Mm-hmm. That exact same feeling is how I approach writing, right? It's the same thing when I'm walking and thinking, like, how is this chapter going to work? Oh, I see. If I move this here and bring in this thing here and I pull this out, it clicks. And it feels the same as when a proof clicks. Nothing about that process involves hands on a keyboard. Right. But it's something I think that's foreign sometimes when people are new to writing. It's this sense of you are planning and going for a sensation of rightness before you even are looking at a sheet of paper. You're thinking about, this will follow this. Does this idea make sense? Is this a bit of a MacGuffin? Yeah. Is there a red herring here? Like, all these movie terms show up in nonfiction writing, as you know, right? I mean, why am I introducing this concept if it contradicts what comes later and there's no resolution of why it does? Like, that's going to sit in, just going to be grit in the gears of someone who's reading. And so when all that clicks in your head, then you know, okay, now I'm ready to
Well, I've been thinking about this because this is the first time I've ever done interrelated books. So, like, most authors, especially in nonfiction, you're doing independent, self-contained projects. You're like, I'm doing a book about this, I'm doing a book about that. And perhaps you might sell one or two books at the same time, but they're usually two unrelated books, right? I just had two ideas at the same time, they wanted to buy them. But to sell this series on the cardinal virtues was weird because first I had to go, okay, the next 4 projects I'm doing are outlined. Yep. The order I'm doing them is outlined. And then I had to think on the first one, you know, okay, how do I crack this book on courage? Who are the first thing was, what are the 3 parts? And then who are the main characters in those 3 parts? Because that's the structure I was doing. But then I had to go, okay, does this thing that I think is an important trait of a virtuous person, is this actually in courage or is this actually in justice? Is this a self-discipline thing or is this more rooted in wisdom? And so, because if I make a decision in book 1, it has implications for book 2, 3, and 4. And that's something I've decided. I came up with it maybe in the discipline book, but I decided to move it to the wisdom book, which was a form of wisdom and talent. And I think it fits into this idea of like truly being productive is like an awareness of downstream consequences, or how moving this thing changes these other things. And people who are too rushed or frenzied, or they haven't stepped back and gotten a larger perspective, are not able to do that. So like, you could be talking to an employee and go, sorry, Tuesday's thing isn't going to, the email or that thing isn't going to work. And you take it for granted that because you've touched this thing, all these other things now have to change, but they just do this thing. It's like, hey, if I like, hey, you're doing my calendar, and then I just told you, like, actually I have to get on a plane on Thursday. You have to cancel everything that was in the calendar on Friday, right? And that requires an ability to see how things are interrelated. And you have to have a sense of the whole, what you're trying to accomplish, to know what they're related to and leading up to.
Yes. So now we're getting really far away from let's just rock and roll and start.
Just, what are you doing right now?
You know, this is a bit of a divergence, but I've been working on this article for the New Yorker, an artificial intelligence article. But this exact distinction comes up, and maybe this will be out by the time this interview airs. But it's an exact distinction between what large language models, like the GPT models that power ChatGPT, what they can and can't do. The number one thing they can't do, if you're looking at it from an actual engineering perspective, is look into the future. and understand, simulate possibilities
Yeah.
in the future, right? So it can only look at what you have right now, knowing what it knows, spit out some good words that matches this. And so the future of AI are these systems where you have a language model and then you have these simulators. Right. And the technology comes out of game bots, right? This is how you win at chess. It's how you win at Go. It's how you win at checkers with a computer. You have to look into the future.
Yeah.
Well, if we do this, what might they do? What might this do? And so generalizing that is what's needed for AI to look anything like we might actually think of as a human intelligence, right? So like in 2001, HAL, right, the supercomputer, won't open the pod bay doors, right? So the Dave is like, open the pod bay doors, and HAL knows like this, you want to disconnect me. No, how does he know that? Well, he has to be able to simulate, well, if I do this and you're going to do this, and this is something I don't want you to do. So actually, the kind of the takeaway here is simulating the future in the article is core to how humans think.
Yes.
And it's like one of the reasons why there's a big gap between, ChatGPT and a human is seeing the implications of things in the future. A bit of a divergence, but it's interesting though.
I mean, you think like game theory would be this thing that like Aristotle was talking about, but it's like really recent.
It's von Neumann. Yeah.
Yeah. I tell the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis in Stillness is the Key, which I think is another example of this idea of stepping back and seeing the big picture. Like the military advice to Kennedy is unanimous. Like, bomb Cuba, and like you cannot wait one more second until you do this. Like the future of humanity depends on you basically wiping Cuba from the map.
Yeah.
And only Kennedy, who's not trained in, these things, goes, but what will the Russians do?
Yeah.
And the ability to just think like, well, I'm going to do this. And then what they are going to, he's thinking, what are the people in the room with Khrushchev telling him?
Yep.
Right. And obviously they gave him bad advice, because the idea that the United States is just going to allow there to be missiles on Cuba was like ridiculous on its face. But Kennedy realizes like he has the same hardline advisors that I do.
Yeah.
And he steps back and to his credit, like we call this the 13 days, like it could have happened in 13 minutes. You know what I mean? Like he says we need time to think about this, and they both finally do. But he has both the empathy, the self-control, the wisdom, also the sense of like, hey, if we screw this up, we're all going to die, to go like, yeah, my best option is this.
Yes.
But your only option after I use my best option is the worst option.
Yes.
And we're not going to walk away from that.
Well, I'm going to complete the circle then, because so part of what Kennedy, coincidentally, compared to the last story, part of what he was doing at this time is in the Kennedy White House, they were a big fan of this new board game called Diplomacy. Right? Which it's a board game, I don't know if you know it, but it's sort of like Risk. It's a World War I Europe. But the key to diplomacy is before every move, all the players talk privately with each other. Right? So you have these one-on-one private conversations, you're making deals and alliances, you're backstabbing, it's all relationships. And then after you talk to everybody, everyone writes down their move and gives it to an arbiter who then does all the moves. And you see, hey, was I betrayed or this or that? So Kennedy was really into this game. Supposedly Kissinger, the lore is, like, would train by playing this game to get ready for like his realpolitik role as Secretary of State.
You know what's funny? You can see these notepads from Kennedy during the missile crisis. And I'm just thinking of this as you say it right now. What he writes: diplomacy, 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 diplomacy. Like he's just writing.
They've
it
been
down.
playing this game.
Yes, that's probably what he's thinking.
So, but here's what's interesting about it. So in this article I was working on, what was interesting, what it's about is so a group of engineers at Meta created an AI that wins at diplomacy.
Okay.
Right. So they're using web diplomacy server. People don't know they're playing against. They don't know they're playing against a computer. And how did that work? Is that the only way this could work? And I talked to some of the engineers at Meta. Is they at first tried to just train up a language model like a GPT-4 to just know a lot about diplomacy and like this is a good move based on other moves I've seen in the past. And they said it's terrible, right? But when they added in a future simulator. Right, because the main engineer on this had come up winning at poker. He built the first bot that actually beat professional poker players.
Okay.
Right, so he knew, and that's all simulating moves in the future. They put these two things together. That's how they began the win at diplomacy with AI.
Interesting.
Is that they had the language model that could say, here's what the other players just said, and here's what I think this means, and then a simulator model that was figuring out. So if this happens, what would they do? And if they're lying though, what would happen? And it would work through the possibilities. You put these two things together, now you can you can play diplomacy well. So yeah,
Interesting.
so it all connects.
Yeah, I'm writing this story in the book I'm doing now, and there's sort of a controversial figure in it, but I really want to include the story.
Yeah.
And so like, I think earlier on in my life, like let's say when I was obstacle, I'd just be like, I like the story, I'm including it.
Yeah.
And now, knowing that, okay, then you get asked about it, or then it doesn't age well, or whatever, I'm like, okay, what is the footnote that I have to put here to anticipate
Yes.
the objection and address it? And you have a good one. I forget who you're talking about.
Les Moonves, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, there's someone
That was
else.
one we thought about, yeah.
There's someone else you mentioned who wasn't good. I forget who it was, but it was interesting. You were like, someone who marries their Mitch, Ian Fleming.
Oh, Ian Fleming, yeah.
Yeah, you're like, hey,
Yeah.
like I'm only using him in this regard.
Yeah.
I do know about the other stuff.
Not a
I'm
great
just-
husband.
Yeah, I
Not a
know about
great
the other
husband,
stuff.
yeah.
I'm just choosing not to mention it. This is not necessary for the story.
Yeah.
But like, to me, that's a good example of aware of downstream consequences. Like you're like, I've done this enough times.
Yep.
I know if I do this, a potential reader objection is why.
Yes.
So if I do this in the interim, I can preempt that, and then we can just move on.
Yes, which is, by the way, all nonfiction writing now
Yeah.
is like, because there's a whole segment of review strategy, which is if I have an objection, my review is sophisticated.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of what we do these days is having to play defense against that, but that's insider baseball.
No, of course. Well, okay, so I want to talk about something that I thought about in the book, because you tell the story of Merlin Mann, and he has this sort of breakdown in Box Zero.
Yeah.
I am curious, as I've read that story. I hear people, they're like, oh, I was burned out, I was doing too much. But then I actually like look at what they did and how busy they were, and I don't get it. And then I also look at their output and productivity after, and it doesn't look that much better either. Do you know what I mean? I feel like there's almost this competition to like claim you had this like breakdown and then you had this breakthrough, and on either side I just go like, show me the work. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Wait.
what have you done?
Well, you're saying someone will have like a breakdown, like I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
And then be super hustling on the other side about the
No,
story of slowing down or something like this.
Yeah. Or just like I guess what I'm saying is, when you look at the productivity space as a whole,
Yeah.
the people who are writing about either like, you got to hustle, you got to work 40 hours a week, 40 hours a day, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, show me what you do.
Yeah.
Like, show me the actual success, because I don't see it. And then on the other hand, I see the people who are like, I was doing that, but now I'm doing this better thing and I'm much more balanced. And I go, also show me the fucking work.
Yeah.
And I like, to me, the people I admire aren't talking about productivity that much.
Yeah.
And they're just like, the proof is in the pudding. Do you know what I mean? And I think you're a good example. You've written all these books. You're talking about it, of course. But my point is, like, to me, the ultimate validator of any strategy is like, what's the outcome?
Yeah.
And there is this whole sort of guru space, and I just don't see it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the marketing people who have never sold anything.
Yeah. I mean, the productivity space is, I'm interested in your take on it. It's a weird space, right? And if we look just in books, for example, it's often claimed, like you mentioned there, like, oh, there's all these people out there saying work 80 hours a day or whatever. Actually, they're not. Like, no one writes books. The last book I could find, maybe some others, I've looked into this. Like, okay, every article about productivity starts with, I know everyone else is telling you to work all the time, but guess what? Shocker. I'm saying work. No one is actually saying that. Like, the only book I could find along those lines was maybe Extreme Productivity, which was this book that came out about 10 years ago, where it was just like actually I thought it was a good concept book. It's a busy executive, and he just says, I'm very busy, here's how I do it.
I think the hustle porn,
It's more online, I think.
it's definitely online. Yeah, you're right. It's not in books, but there is, it's like when you see it, like, here's my schedule, and the schedule's insane.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
It's an online thing.
Yeah.
There is a whole sort of more youth-oriented Instagram, YouTube, TikTok culture, and I've learned more about that. And some of that has gone to weird extremes, right? Like, I used to write about how to study when I was in my early 20s. There's a whole study YouTube space, which is now someone will live stream 12 consecutive hours of studying. It's performance art, right? I mean, it's not at this point actually.
I've never done anything for 12 hours consecutively in my life it's ever sleep.
It's crazy. And then people, the people laud it, right? So I agree that's true. The nice thing about productivity as a space, though, is that you can just study people who aren't writing about it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You can actually just say, right? Like which is what I do heavily in the book. And it's why like a big portion of this book, for example, is also trying to understand, because it's looking more at knowledge work, understand what we even mean by productivity now, because it's broken. Right? Yeah. Like trying to understand what do we actually mean by productivity? We don't really know. And if we really nail it down, it's not really working well. So what would it look like to do something different? There's a whole cultural critique aspect, but even that is getting tricky, because I think in response to the same cause, right? There's this growing burnout among knowledge workers. There's also been a huge rise in what I think of as the anti-productivity movement, which, is also heavily critical, but in a way that I think is less
like the
ironically
anti-work movement.
It's like an anti-work movement as response to the burnout, right? And so it's ironically it's kind of a non-productive critique of productivity.
Well, workaholism and work aversion are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, and it's culturally salient, right? So there's a certain theoretical sophistication if you can maybe bring in like late stage capitalism or some other types of like grad seminar style critique, but ultimately those critiques end up being pretty nihilistic, right?
Yes.
It's like don't work.
Yeah,
except for like subscribe to my Substack that I'm working very hard on, but otherwise don't work.
Well, like I like those two books, the Daily Routines books, or Daily Rituals books. They're both very good. There's the one for men and then
Mason
one of women's
Curry.
return. Yeah. But it's like this dude's. That's the only thing. Those are the only two things he's done. Like you know what I mean? And I always go I know what it takes to do a book. Like 2 books in 10 or 15 years or whatever is like. Not enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're not like works of staggering original genius, you know? Like, so I'm like, what are you doing all day? And so sometimes I hear about these productivity experts or these people who are like, this tip, that whatever. And I go like, but what are you doing? Yeah. And I look at it and I don't get it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that maybe they look at me or you or something and they assume we're working crazy hours, but it's like, I'm not at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, I guess I come back to this question. I'm like, what are these people doing all day?
Well, I mean, I think it's why it helps me for sure when I write about these topics, the fact that I'm a professor.
Yeah.
The bulk of my writing, I write for the New Yorker where I'm on the contributing staff, and most of it's really more about techno critique. Like I run or help found the Center for Digital Ethics at Georgetown. I do a lot of thinking about technology and the way it interacts with us in our lives, and do a lot of writing on it. And that's all stuff that's not just writing about productivity.
Yeah. Sure.
And then I think it helps. Like, okay, hey, by the way, I don't work big hours, so like, how is this possible? Let's rethink about productivity. Hopefully that lands more.
Yeah.
As opposed to what I do is just YouTube videos about productivity, right? I mean, I think it does help.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know. I've said this before, but it's like, I feel like amateurs obsess about tools. Yeah. And like pros just sort of do the thing. And usually their system isn't this sort of perfect, sexy, like systemic thing. That's what I like in your book. It's like, yeah, he just takes a lot of walks, or she sits there a lot, or actually she had this breakthrough on a vacation in the woods. It's never as complicated as the people trying to market some solution or new paradigm for thinking about it want you to think it is.
No, they keep shipping, right?
Yeah.
And they don't procrastinate.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, okay, I want to keep shipping something. But it's not just putting something out the door. It's like, I really am trying to make this really good.
Yeah.
Like, I care a lot about making this good. I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to improve my skills. But also, I'm going to get it out the door, and then we move on to what's next. And I think you probably do the same thing. But it's always been my strategy with books is that, the next one is going to be great strategy. I just tell myself while I'm writing, all right, I want to do this as well as possible. But don't worry about, like, this has to be everything. The next book is going to be the one, and then you just ship what you're doing, right? You're like, I'll do this one well, but the next one is gonna win the National Book Award, right? It allows you to, it takes the pressure off. It's like, okay, this just needs to be good.
Yes.
And you try to do something good and you ship it.
Yeah, there's some humility, but then also freedom in understanding that quantity is a way to get to quality.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're someone who sits down, you're a musician, and you're like, I have to write the greatest song of all time.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to do it because you're not going to write enough songs, right?
Yes.
Like, oftentimes the hit that defines a band or a movement, or you're like, this is my favorite in the catalog. It's different. It's unexpected. It was dashed off in a few minutes as part of a larger project, right? And so the idea that it's weird. You obsess about quality, yes, but then also you do it enough that you're not precious about any one thing. And so that balance, very easily, I think Churchill said, like, you could spell perfectionism as paralysis. And so if you're trying to make something amazing, this work of staggering, world-altering genius, you're not going to do it. But if you're just consistently making stuff, you're going to be getting better and better, and you're also going to be getting more and more opportunities, some of them very timely and some of them very timeless, to express that talent or excellence you've developed, and you're going to increase the chances that one of those is going to be great.
Yeah. I mean, my best-selling book was my fifth. My first book, Deep Work.
Okay.
My first book to hit the New York Times bestseller list was my sixth.
Yes.
You know?
This is basically my trajectory also.
Yeah,
yes.
It gets rolling. Yeah. But I think you and I had the advantage, if we're going to think just about writers, is also we started young. Right?
Sure.
It was just like, let's just get started. And, you know, I got started really young, right? I mean, I signed my first deal right after my 21st birthday.
Okay.
And there's very few books they're going to let, you know, a 21-year-old write. But that was very freeing. It was like, okay, my pitch was, let me write about college advice because I'm a college student, and there's an angle there that kind of made sense for turning the keys over to a 21-year-old, but that took the pressure off. It's like, yeah, this is practical. I'm just trying to write a book that works. It's for a very narrow audience, and I wrote another one right away. Right? Like, let me just write another one like that. Let me try to make that a little bit better. There's less pressure than if I had waited until, you know, I was in my 30s and established as a professor and said, here's my first book. And this is better be really smart and get a good review in the New York Times Book Review. Or what if people think I'm stupid? By the time I was a professor, I'd already published 4 books, right? You know, it was a different, I was like, I've been out there, you know, I've been taking swings. So to be able to just get started when the pressure is lower.
I think Michael Lewis's best book, and then I think his best-selling book is The Big Short, right? And he's like 20 plus, 25 years into doing it when that comes out. And he's been writing about finance. He's been writing about characters. He's been writing about the economy. He's been writing about people, unique stories for all this time. He wrote a lot of forgettable books between those two. And he's written some forgettable ones since, right?
Yeah.
But the man met the moment, and that man had thousands of hours and thousands of pages of experience.
Yes.
And so that book probably did come together pretty easily, and he couldn't have known, like, just where the Great Recession was going to go, just what it would mean, that it would eventually be. He couldn't have known any of that, but he was uniquely suited to do that thing because he'd done all these other things.
And Lewis got started the exact same way you and I did, right? So my first book, why are they going to give me a deal? Okay, to write about students. Your first book, it was writing about your specific professional experience you had gone through. Trust me, I'm lying. Lewis's first book about his experience at Solomon Brothers. Right? Sure. So it was like, get in the door however you can, right? And so he did that, and then that got him Vanity Fair. He was doing election coverage. People forget this, but like, he was making his bones on character writing, he was covering like primary elections for Vanity Fair, which had great editors, and that was helping him hone his craft, right? Sure. And then he wrote The New Thing.
Yes,
which,
also great.
Yeah, but like, people don't remember that book. People
don't
remember who Jim Clark is.
Yeah, it's about Netscape.
Hyperion, you know.
No, he wrote a book called what is it? He wrote a book that came out like on September 11th, like about the tech boom.
Yes.
Then the bubble popped. It was immediately forgotten.
Yeah.
He wrote a bunch of, and he was writing for Slate and the New Republic. He was just like a magazine writer.
Yeah.
And
always be working on a project. What's my next book? You know, and I bet he had that same mentality we talked about. I want this book to be good.
Yes. But,
you know, the next one, that'll be the Big Short, right? So you ship.
Yes.
You know, you try to be good, but you ship. But we can generalize this, though, right? I mean, I think this is a lot of interesting production, even in a normal job, right? Like, even in a normal job with a desk that you have to go to, there probably is, this is what really matters that I could do. Like, this is the skill, the type of project I work on. This is what moves the needle, not the email, not the meetings, but the white papers I write or whatever, right? So even there, these same type of mindsets apply of like, I'm going to do really well. I'm going to produce great stuff here. I'm going to keep pushing myself to get better, but I'm not going to get too precious with it. And if I just start that, I'm Michael Lewis writing books 2 for $6, I'm going to end up at some point at this new level of skill. I'm going to be indispensable, right? So this sort of slowly productive approach, I think, generalizes pretty far.
That's a really important skill. Like, what is the stuff that matters and what is the stuff that doesn't matter? Like, how do you know what actually is important? Because a job has a whole bunch of responsibilities. There's certain obligations that do matter, certain ones that don't. There's certain traditions or best practices that are important, and other ones are just sort of ritual or, inertia or the status quo. And so knowing, hey, these are the, like one of the rules I have as a writer, instead, like, people go, how many pages a day do you write, or how many words a day do you write? I think those are totally nonsense metrics, because first off, all books are of different lengths, right? So if I'm a novelist, I have to turn in 100 or 200,000 word book, right? Even that's a huge difference, right? Like, there's short novels and long novels, but every book contract has a different word count that you have to deliver, and mine's like between 50 and 60,000 words, which is a very short book, right? So if I'm someone who writes 4,000 words a day, like some novelists do, like, it's not going to take me very long to write these books. So word count doesn't really make sense. Pages don't really count, because are you counting like in Google Docs or page, Word or that's nonsense. So I just say I have to make a positive contribution every day. Like, I have to do something that moves the manuscript forward in some way. So that could be I generated a bunch of new pages. That also could be I figured out the subtitle. That could be I deleted a bunch of pages. I moved things around. I found 2 chapters actually are about the same thing, and I decided to combine them. And so all I have to do is make a positive contribution every day. And so I have a vague sense of what is a positive contribution and then what's just like fiddling. But like knowing, if you're a stock trader, or if you run a hedge fund, or you're a venture capitalist, or I don't know, you coach a football team, and you're saying, okay, what's my positive contribution today? Do you actually know what that is?
It's really hard.
It's probably not that I was here from this time to this time. It's probably not measured by I was in this many meetings, or I yelled at this many people. It's got to be like, oh, no. I figured out that I figured out that Jordan, was it Kobe or someone? They were like, I figured out Kobe goes to his left, but when he goes to his right, he shoots, 11% worse from the field. And so all I have to do so that itself is a huge breakthrough. And then the next day, I'm just going to figure out, how am I going to make this person go to their right instead of the left?
What do I do with my footwork?
That's what matters. Not how many weights did you lift, but what's the things that matter that move the needle, and to be able to figure that out. That's almost everything.
That is, so I think it is almost everything. And I think it is harder than we think, and also undervalued, right? Like, it really is everything. But here's what happens. People don't even try to find it, right? Because what people do instead is they write the story of what they want to be true. Okay. Like, I think this is the biggest obstacle to people moving really far forward on something they care about. They write a story for themselves about, this is what I want to be true about what it takes to move to the next level, because this is what I actually want to do.
Okay.
Right. So I want it to be about, get my novel published. It's about like having the right Scrivener set up and National Novel Writing Month, or doing this many words a day or whatever.
Sit at this typewriter.
I'm going to sit at this typewriter. Because that's kind of fun. It's like, usually the stories people come up with is challenging but tractable.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, it'll be a little bit hard, but I could do it. I can feel good about myself. And we do this all the time. It's about this or it's about that.
Right.
I think internet culture has also really, especially for younger people, inculcated this idea of the shortcut. Like, if you got the right advice here, and you're going to really make your way through. And I keep learning again and again in my career. Like, the number one thing you can do is figure out, how do people actually succeed at this? And like, you have to stare that in the face, right? It's often very narrow. Like, the path is very narrow, not really open to reinvention. It's like, no, this is, if you want to play, you're a good chess player, you want to play chess at the master level, this is what the training looks like. Right? There's no like way you're going to get around. You want to be a professional musician, like, this is what it looks like, and it still might not succeed. You want like your podcast to be successful, right? It's probably, no, this is what you have to do, and that's really hard, right? And sometimes when you face the reality, you find out, I can't do that. Right.
Yeah.
Or
sure. I don't have what it takes.
Or I do, but I don't have the willingness to put in that much time. I can't do that. All right. But that's good because you say, great, then let me not try to do that and let me find something else. So we don't try to do that work. And it's really hard work. I mean, one of the things I've recommended people do in like a normal job where you're doing this is temporarily make yourself a business journalist. I'm going to like take people out for coffee who they're where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know yet how they got there, but that's my like, I like what they're doing. If I could get there, their flexibility, this was where I want to be. All right. Let me now, as if I'm writing a Michael Lewis book about this person, like really interview them. Don't ask them. This is a journalist trick. You never ask people, what's your advice for doing this?
Yes.
People are terrible at giving advice, right? I mean, trust me, I've been down this.
Yeah.
Someone who writes and interviews people about advice. They're terrible at getting advice. It puts people on the spot. And what they do is frantically try to think of something that's internally consistent.
Yeah.
Like that's what happens if I say, give me your advice for like succeeding in a bookstore. Like if I put you on the spot here, you would come up with something because like I want to have an answer that makes sense, but like it could have nothing to do with what matters. So don't ask them for their advice. Ask them, well, what happened in your first year?
Yeah.
When was the next promotion? Oh, interesting. What did you do if you think about it? What were you doing there that the other people who were sort of up for this and didn't get it? What were you doing that they weren't? Oh, so I'm isolating. Like that's what mattered. Okay, what were you doing that didn't really matter? If you rewound that, when you have these conversations, it pulls out like, oh, this is what matters. And there's usually a moment of, oh, shoot, this is what really matters, right?
Yeah.
But that can also be followed by some inspiration. You're like, okay, this is much harder than I thought it was going to be, but at least I see the path that actually goes uphill to the top of the hill.
I think Tim Ferriss told me one time, he's like, one of the secrets when he's trying to figure something out or learn something that's really hard is he's like, I don't want to talk to like the best person in the world or even like the second best person in the world. I want to talk to someone who's really good at it, but shouldn't be good at it.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you ask Michael Jordan or Shaquille O'Neal how they got good at basketball, they're going to tell you this whole, Michael Jordan's like, oh, it's like, he makes up this story about getting cut from the high school basketball team, which didn't happen. That's not how it was at all. But if you ask Bugsy Bogues or Spud Webb,
John Stockton,
right? Like someone who on paper shouldn't be as good as they were. That
Allen
person's
Iverson,
clearly figured something out.
Yeah.
And they've probably had to think about it more. Actually, this is an argument in Michael Lewis's Moneyball. He's like, Billy Beane was just not good enough at baseball that he had to really figure out the game of baseball to play it at all.
Yeah.
Robert Greene is a good example of this. If Robert Greene was Henry Kissinger, he probably wouldn't be able to write the 48 Laws of Power. It's that he keeps getting bounced around and it's not working for him, that he has to understand it and be able to articulate it in a way that someone who is intuitively or naturally good or in the room where it's happening, probably not going to be able to explain it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me, I was just, before I came here, was out in Santa Monica with Mark Manson.
Yeah.
And so, he co-wrote the Will Smith.
Yes.
So we're talking Will Smith, and it was a great book. And that's one of the things that comes out in that book. And Mark and I were talking about that. Will Smith also is like very unlikely to be the biggest movie star in the world when he's a TV star with a music background.
Yeah, sure.
But he studied Tom Cruise.
Huh.
Right. So part of why Will Smith was thinking, okay, what is Tom Cruise doing?
Yeah.
What's working, what's not? And he figured out a lot of things that wasn't obvious. Right. So he was studying Cruise because Cruise was older and was the biggest movie star in the world. And he figured out things, for example, like, the international markets. I see international box office generates 50% more money. It gives you more clout. And Cruise is going to every one of these countries. And doing these international publicity junkets that no one else is doing.
Right.
And so then Smith could say, okay, we want to do exactly what Cruise is doing there. Right. And
sure,
now
sure.
suddenly.
You think The Tonight Show is why he is an international movie star. And it's actually some Dutch newspaper that he gave an hour to over and over and over again, times every country in Europe.
He's going to Asia. Exactly. Like Tom Cruise really innovated, like go to China, go to Japan. I mean, some of this was before the Chinese market opened it up, but actually go to these other countries. So he was really studying. And then, of course, you can see this becoming almost pathological when you get to the point in that autobiography where Will Smith now is so intent on winning when he plays Monopoly that he hires a professional Monopoly coach to teach him how to always win at Monopoly, to the point where eventually Jada was like, what are you doing? We're playing with like our kids. But that's the mindset, right? Is like, okay, I want to be, in that case, the #1 movie star in the world. I can write a story, which is like have the right type of movie or like be in good shape. He's like, but why don't I get to the core of like what actually matters?
No, that's interesting because it does come back to the idea of slow productivity, which is sometimes the thing that makes someone naturally productive, naturally good, is that sort of ambition, that drive, that sort of forward motion. And that can make you successful to a point. Yeah. But it's also very difficult to turn off. And if you're trying to do your thing sustainably over a long period of time, if you don't want to burn out or blow yourself up or succeed, but at the cost of marriage, family, happiness, health, etc., to be able to do it slowly and a bit more meaningfully and maybe obsess over quality a bit more, that's a whole other set of skills that are they're not as celebrated. They're also, depending on your personality type, not sort of as natural.
And they're not, the other thing you notice is they're really separatable from busyness, right? So even the super hard charging driving ambitions like the Will Smiths of the world, right? They are working really, really hard, but they're also not busy in the sense of, you know, a normal person might be with, I'm on an email here, a call here, a bunch of different things going, a lot of activity. Another Hollywood example would be director Chris Nolan, right? Doesn't own a smartphone, doesn't own a phone at all, right? He's a guy who works really hard, right?
And it's not that he never does phone calls.
No, and
of course he does.
And he has people who have phones around him, but it's not really about, you know, hey, who's taking your calls? It's the signal that says, which is, I don't want to be part of the typical Hollywood chatter of like this representation calling about this and let's go have lunch. He's like, I just want to work on my movies. Right. So sometimes slow productivity, some of these exemplars, they're working really, really hard, but it's focused and it's intentional. And there's typically huge variations in intensity. So it's, you know, 6 months until Oppenheimer comes out and I'm in the editing room all day, but then like 2 years might go by after that when I'm gestating, you know, so it's more balanced, but they're not busy. Right. Which is that first principle in the book of doing fewer things. They're not covering their plates with lots of different things and lots of different options because no one ever got great doing that.
Yeah. I've and this ties to your email book, but becoming the person who is not on top of their email was a skill I had to learn. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like to and it feels almost egotistical or a little like, what's even the word? Like it feels like self-important or dramatic to be like, no, I'm the artistic type that does it. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Or hey, I'm responding to this 3 months after you send it to me, but I was off doing this thing. Like I actually had to sort of consciously do that. Yeah. Because first off, it just became too much, but also that skill, which I learned at some point of like, you hit it into my court, I'm hitting it back into your court. Like that's me getting good at a game that's me being good at a game that I don't really want to be playing. I want to be playing this game, which is I don't know what day it is, or like I lost track of this, or sorry, you were talking to me, I wasn't paying attention. I have to almost cultivate again, this is somewhat of a stereotype of the artist or the professor or the thinker person, but like, no, that's the game that I want to be playing. That's the world that I want to be living in. And there's almost an affectation to it that is the opposite of what most people are doing or what you grew up doing or what you are comfortable doing. And so I'm just like, I just have to go, I have 400 unread emails, like real emails, not like thousands of newsletters, but just like there's a bunch of people, some of them very important. I'm not saying like, screw you, I'm not going to get back to you. I'm just saying like, even thinking about what I'm going to say and replying is taking me away from this thing, which is where I should be.
Yeah. I mean, it's Chris Nolan without a phone. Yeah. Like I'm trying to make this movie. Yeah. You know, and this other stuff is cool, but I'm trying to make this movie. Or Neil Stephenson's Why I'm a Bad Correspondent essay, right? He's like, if I answered all these letters and went to all these conferences, which is what science fiction writers typically do, in the end, I would have all these different one-on-one conversations to point at, but I'd rather have like 100,000 word book that 1 million people read. You know, that's better than having 500, making 500 people happy in a conversation. But that same mindset is applicable even to jobs where, okay, I have a boss and I can't completely just stop listening to emails. And so people will often say, so, you know, it must be nice for you, but I don't even want to hear this advice because like I can't just be Neil Stephenson or Chris Nolan. But knowing the game that matters really makes a difference. Now, you might not be able to play it as purely as a full-time writer, but you can for sure play that game better than the other people in your office if they don't even know that's the game they're playing. So you're not able to ignore your inbox. But when you understand, like, oh, this is what's going to make a difference in my company, now there's all sorts of things you can do to reduce the burden of that inbox, to begin to trade, Adam Grant calls them idiosyncrasy credits.
Yes.
As I get better at this, I'm going to trade accountability, hold me accountable, for less accessibility. I'm not involved in these things over here. There's things you can start doing if you know the game you're supposed to be playing. And it's going to be maybe very specifically constructed for your particular job and the personalities. But we shouldn't let imperfect be the obstacle of being much better. So even in a job where I can't throw out my email address, if I know this is what's going to make the difference and this is getting in the way, there's a lot I can do where I'm now spending 2x more time on this than I was before. I still have to do emails, but I'm doing half as many because now I'm getting clear about what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, for better or for worse, businesses will make all sorts of allowances for people who get stuff done and deliver results.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And look, if you're at a company where you're delivering crazy good results, you're like a top or an elite performer, and they're hassling you about your dress code, you're probably at the wrong company. And there is a company that will not hassle you about that and like make whatever arrangements or stipulations you want to get you. Like, talent is always the variable that is rarest.
It's the number one problem employers have.
Yes.
Is getting good people.
Yeah.
They're desperate for good people. I think sometimes we tell the story in our heads of like, no, it's just this like purely sort of vindictive, exploitative relationship. And like, I'm nobody and they're just sort of pulling the strings. What can I do? People are desperate for good people.
Yeah.
I gave you credit for this in an interview recently. I don't know if I actually heard this from you or not. So you'll have to tell me if this was you or not. There's a danger along these lines. There's a danger, especially when you're it's the opposite dangers. Like when you're new to a position, being too good at the stuff that's not the core value. And I don't know if this is from when you were talking about early on being an assistant.
Yeah, I was an assistant in Hollywood, and this guy who's now a very big movie producer, he was like, look, I was where you were. He's like, my best advice to you is like, don't be too good of an assistant. He was pointed down the hall. He's like, that guy right there.
They'll never let you go.
He's like, he's a lifer.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's two types. There's people who are lifers, and then there are people who are going places, and you got to decide which one you want to be. He wasn't saying like, if you want to be an assistant, don't be one. But he was saying, yeah, like if you are indispensable on the phones, they'll keep you on the phones. But if you're holding down the phones, but you keep like giving your boss good ideas that they use in meetings, like they'll promote you much quicker.
Right. So be competent. Don't be incompetent.
Yes.
So be like, clearly I'm competent. Like I'm not dropping the ball and I can kind of do these things, but I'm not going out of my way to be like, hey, I foresaw that like this is near your dry cleaner and I set up the driver to stop. Like don't make their life too easy. But then keep signaling the stuff that matters for the next rung up, which is take me off the phones and make me a junior agent. That I'm showing you I could bring in money.
Yes.
Yeah, like I probably have what it takes to do that, right? I'm not easily flustered. I have good ideas. I'm good with the client relations. I'm okay with this other stuff. But the reason why I brought that up, and I've been bringing it up, in other interviews, is because I'm thinking about this is essentially what you're doing when what you're mastering is the game of your inbox.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to clear this thing out. Okay, yes, everyone's getting what they need. I'm following up and this, and like I'm very responsive and I get everyone answers quickly and I'm always on my phone at all times. So you're always going to answer pretty quickly, and I'm never the thing that's going to slow down. I'm never going to be the link in the chain that makes the whole thing pull through slower.
Right.
You're the assistant who's great at manning the phones. Even if you have a high level job in some sense, that's the wrong game to be playing well.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the CEO is not the person you're so great at answering emails quickly. You're right. You're never actually measured on that.
You want them to go, hey, come in this meeting with me.
Yeah.
Like, don't just set it. You want to be sending the signal that like you have something to contribute.
Yes.
Not that you're good at getting coffee or whatever.
Or I produce, when you give me a project, like I knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
Like that's good. And then you're like, oh, you're slow in answering these emails, but you know what? This is important. So I'm going to give this report to Ryan because like it's going to be really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like he's a really good researcher and his writing's sharp. And the last thing was really impressive. So yeah, care about I'm going to bother this other person over here with like the small stuff because like he's really quick at answering on emails.
Yeah, and by the way, that can be someone who likes that and wants to be good at it. And the funny thing is when you find those people, you're so excited to find those people, and they can command their own, salary and benefits and demands because so many of the people that you tend to hire or see for those positions see it as a stepping stone and don't want to be in it. And there's a cost to that, right? Because you're having to constantly replace those people.
Yeah,
and
that's not good either.
So it's figuring the thing that you want to be good at that moves the needle for you.
Yeah, but don't accidentally become an assistant when you're 7 steps up. That's what I think happens when you play the game of email.
Yeah.
Is you could be an executive, right? But you're playing the game of the assistant by like, what I'm good at is answering emails really quickly and people get quick responses, because ultimately there's no friction or traction on that actually generates direct value, right? What's the thing you produced that we sold? What's the client relationship that brought in a lot more money? What is the new insight on which we built a new business strategy? None of that, it's not playing that game. So you can very high up the chain. I mean, I see professors fall into this a lot. This is like an assistant professor trap. Because you have to know as an assistant professor, the game you are playing is publishing.
Yeah.
It's the only game you're playing, right? Like that, you were going to lose your job after 7 years if you don't publish a lot. That's how it works. We're going to temporarily give you this job. If by the end of 7 years you have not gotten tenure, you have to go. And how do you get tenure? We solicit confidential letters from the top researchers in your field, and all they talk about is how important is his or her work.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't get tenure by teaching really well. You can't get tenure through politics because it's confidential letter writers looking at your research. You can't get tenure through I did a bunch of committees and I was really useful, or the dean likes me, or all these things people think goes on. It's your work.
Yeah.
Your research. How important was it? Right? And these letters are brutal, by the way. I've been on the other side of this. It is, here are the institutions at which this person would get tenure and would not. Here are the 3 people that I think are most comparable to this person right now. This is 2 people who are better than this person right now. I would say this person is a little bit worse. Like it is, it's like the NFL combine, but with, publishing papers basically. So an assistant professor has to learn that's all that really matters.
Right.
All right. Now, once you know that, try not to be, too annoying to other people.
But try not to be horrible.
Don't be horrible. But like, this is not your game. And a big trap for assistant professors is they get stuck in the game because it's scary. The publication game is scary because, that might not look like anything today. Right. It's played on the scale of years. Right. So they feel much more comfortable. I'm answering all the emails. I'm joining all the committees. I'm very responsive and useful. I'm taking on, because they want to create a sense of like, I'm doing things and I'm busy. And then when the tenure time comes, it's, hey, where's your papers?
Well, you could argue the same is true for a college student, right? So you get into the college, you're at an elite university or a mediocre university, it doesn't really matter. And if you think success at the end of that 4 years is like what your grades are, you've probably screwed up, right? Even if you're trying to get into grad school, because really it matters what relationships have you formed, what things have you learned, right? What if you found out you really don't want to do, right? So if like you spend 4 years getting great grades and you get into a law school, but you haven't figured out like that you hate the law, that's a huge failure. But also like if you for most students who aren't going to be continuing on, nobody's going to care about your GPA ever again. So if that's the game that you're playing, you're setting yourself up not to be very successful because the important thing was, I learned these people, or I got a job at this place, or you have to be figuring out big things that are gonna matter 5, 10, 20 years from now. And the things that are very easily measured and clear don't matter even then, and they're definitely not going to matter down the road.
It could be even worse, right? I had this exact experience, right? So early in grad school, I'm at MIT. I had published these 2 books about how to be a good student, right? And I had a blog, and so I had this great idea. I was like, what I'm going to do is mentor a collection of students from Boston area colleges who are struggling. And what I'll do in my mind was, I'll just apply my advice, and they're going to be A students and happy, and then everyone will see how good my advice works and buys my books, right? So one of the students, I called her Lena. It wasn't her real name, but I called her Lena. I wrote about this on my blog. This is almost 20 years ago now. So she came to me and she broke my whole understanding because she came to me and was saying, I'm really I'm stressed out, I'm struggling, and my grades aren't where I want them to be or whatever. And so I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's build a calendar. I used to, I call it autopilot schedule. Let's just take your activities and classes, figure out what work is due regularly, find time for it on the calendar. This is a standard thing. Yeah. I started doing this for her, and we ran out of hours. Like we ran out of hours for her to work because she was double majoring with a minor and had like 9 different activities, and like it didn't fit. So it wasn't, her problem was not, oh, grades are what matters. It was actually a college admissions mindset that said activities, quantity of activities, extracurricular. So you had all this stuff. And I was like, okay, I mean, Lena, look, it literally doesn't fit into your schedule, right? So we have to slice and dice, like get rid of all these activities, cut down to one major, like just do something well, but give yourself time to also be, a person, a student. She couldn't do it. Right. And it turned out what happened was, her whole town, her whole family was like, oh my God, she got into MIT. Like all of their hopes were on her shoulders. And so she felt like, I have to do really well here. Yeah. But she didn't know the game that mattered. So the only game she knew was, well, the way I got into college
was by doing a lot of
stuff. A lot of things. Yeah. So she's like, if I'm not doing a lot of things, how else will I signal that I'm being impressive? And I owe it to all these people to be impressive. So she had a mental breakdown and had to leave. I think she eventually came back, but she had to, take a long leave of absence and, come back because she couldn't get out of that game. Right. And I was telling her, like, look, if you want to go to grad school, I'm in grad. Let me tell you how this works. How do you get into grad school? Let's say you want to go to grad school. You want to get a doctorate. You do need to have a good GPA in your field. You need to be a really good student in your field. But that means don't do anything else. Yeah, right. Don't do double majors. Why would you double major? Yeah. Don't have 7 activities. Grad school admissions is decided by a group of professors. I've been on this committee many times. I've run it before. They don't care what activities you're in. Right. All they care about, can you come and contribute to our research? So what matters is you did very well in specifically that field, and that you got involved in research, so you can signal, here's a paper or 2 I got involved in as an undergraduate. I can handle doing research. Yeah. I was like, nothing else matters. Right? Like, so that was the game. Yeah. But she was playing the wrong game, and it completely burnt her out. Like, it completely held her back.
Yeah, knowing what game you're playing, that's kind of the ultimate thing. I found this with Daily Stoic early on. So when we started the Daily Stoic Instagram, we would just do like quotes every day, right? Yeah. And then there'd just be quotes from the Stoic, be like the picture of the Stoic and then a quote. And then, like I would have a book coming out, or we'd be making something, and I'd go, hey, it's Ryan, like I'm, have this thing. And they'd be like, who the fuck are you? Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because I realized that the thing that was getting the most engagement by itself, so growing the account, wasn't checking one of the primary boxes of all of it, which was to develop a relationship with people.
So it was not an email newsletter yet? It was...
No, this is just it was all Instagram. These things. Yeah. But let's say I was like, hey, sign up for the email. They're like, what email? What book? Yeah. They didn't know. Yeah. They all they were seeing were these quotes, right? And it was devoid of any connection to any larger thing. Yeah. And so one of the reasons that Daily Stoic, I became more involved in it as a person, even though it's not really what I'm as comfortable with, is that it became impossible without it to actually deliver anything but the quotes.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about this because I'm fascinated by this, right? Okay. Because that's what really, like, your whole empire really took off, right? Sure. I've known you a long time, right? I mean, it was ryanholiday.net. Yes. And the reading list email, right? Which was still around.
That's still around.
So when Daily Stoic, so you're saying when you first conceived the Daily Stoic, you weren't quite playing the first game. You saw it as like, here's a spin-off thing.
I actually saw a Daily Stoic
that's going to just put out quotes, and it's not really me. It's like another business.
Well, I was attracted to it because it was a brand that was not me. I thought this would be like a relief. This would be better, and actually it could be more because it's not me.
Oh, I could have other writers. Exactly. Right. Obstacle had come out at this point.
Obstacle had come out.
Ego, or was this right after Ego?
Ego came out too. This is all around when Daily Stoic, the book, came out.
So you're like, I'm going to write this book, so I might as well have the domain. And then you're like, why don't I have a
the domain was $6,000. I remember. The idea was it was going to be this brand that wasn't me. And so it worked. At first, the brand grew very quickly, and it was doing well. But it turned out there's actually a ceiling when there's not a person involved, because it's not personalized, and people trust people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I see this now. There's all these other. It's funny, right? Like when we did it, nobody thought it was anything, and it didn't seem like it would work. And now, of course, there's all these other people that want to rip it off, that do their own like copycat versions of it, right?
You mean like daily, but something else? Or
no,
Stoic?
like there's the Stoic Daily, or there's like 1,000 Instagram accounts,
Yeah.
right? But like
The every other day Stoic.
it might as well be AI. It could be some troll farm somewhere that's doing it, because there is no person attached to it. So it bumps up into the ceiling in which they're all replaceable. There is no actual personal real connection with any of them.
Yeah.
And it's there is no relationship. It's just like, I get quotes and I don't actually care even who's delivering the quotes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then how do you describe the game you figured out matters is what people want is they want an exemplar of this approach to life that they're able to have like a daily interaction with. It's not just I want to be more stoic. I want to have like a Ryan Holiday.
I want it to be explained to me and articulated to me and embodied to me, and I want it to feel real and attainable and all these other things that only a person can do.
So the shifts then would be, I'm deconstructing your business here, but so the shifts here would be not just quotes, but let's have more like
short form videos,
and you have
article,
right? And you have first person in the articles sometimes, right? More you, right? So like you get a YouTube strategy going, right? Like and you invested up front, like we're going to do produced videos, which is not necessarily the play if what you're trying to do was maximize like views or YouTube views right off the bat, but was a good play for. Here's Ryan Holiday. Like here he is. He's on his ranch. Here he is walking. Like get to see you again and again. Okay. So that got into it. Your socials were doing more. There's more video, more photo. Would you say? I mean, you'd have probably already moved out here, right?
Yes.
But you were leaning into that as I live on a rent. Like I'm not living in the city.
You have to show it. You can't just be
was the bookstore
disembodied voice with a message, because. How can I trust that? What affinity, what connection do I have to it? What does it actually mean to me? How do I know that it's real?
So I'm going to argue, I guess this is what you were thinking, is the painted porch is another masterstroke in this plan, right? Because you're giving people, especially in an age of visuals, there's an embodiment of Ryan, lives in Texas and has this bookstore and he's there and like people are we're in the near the bookstore and there's books everywhere and it gives I don't
know if it's a masterstroke, but it was the idea that it was something I wanted to do anyway, but yes, it's a physical it's a physical manifestation that, again, if you're just like a rip-off Instagram account, you could never afford to do and never would do and never could pull off. So making it real. And I think it's interesting, right? Like, do you read your own audiobooks?
I did for the first time.
So I actually think that you wouldn't think that was important. It takes a lot of work. Like I have to do another one here very shortly. But then you go, okay, wait, somebody is going to, this audiobook is 7 hours long. So somebody is going to have a 7-hour connection with this material. Is it going to be with me, or is it going to be with an intermediary between me and that person? And, so maybe on the one hand, not having a professional narrator, it could decrease your reach because you're not as good at it. I'm not as good at it as whoever the best audiobook reader of the world is. But is that the game that I'm trying to play, maximum reach, or is it also about depth? And do I want to, when someone's deciding to have someone talk, or when someone's deciding, hey, this is a difficult moment in my life, did this thing resonate with me, yes or no? It's going to be whose voice was in their ear. Does that make sense?
Like, it's a funny trivia tidbit. It's the audiobook for Deep Work won an award in an audiobook awards. I guess there's some ceremony. It won an award. Jeff Bottoms had a hat tip.
Not you?
Not me. Right. So it's kind of funny. Like, okay, that was so good. It won an award, but it wasn't playing the right game. You know what switches it over, why I had to do it is, will you podcast now?
Yes.
Okay, so here's hundreds of thousands of people who now have this relationship.
Who's this other person?
It's going to be really weird to have another voice that's like your voice is well known. But that's one of the reasons why I got into podcasting. Is it's relationship. And so in like the writing sense, those old student books I wrote, for example, like some of those have sold hundreds of thousands of copies now. They didn't sell that in 2006. It's because once there's a relationship with a writer,
At
like,
this
let me go
point,
read
it's
his other
probably
stuff.
parents are giving it to their kids, like people who read it.
They have. It's
Yes.
really distressing.
Parental fans of yours are giving it to their kids who are now in high school. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is distressing that
Yeah.
I have people who read it. Maybe they went back. They actually read it in school.
Yeah.
And now are talking about
Yes.
their own kids.
Yeah, that is
that's the
weird.
problem when you start writing when you're young. Yeah. Okay, so games that matter. I know this sounds writing specific.
No.
But this is the challenge, I think, for almost anything someone's doing.
Yeah. Where are the people that you're trying to reach? Where are they? What actually connects with them? And there is this, it feels arrogant, but figuring out that actually most of the things that your industry does or that people do are not winning that game.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of artifice to it or just inertia to it, and that you have to figure out what that stuff is and then not do it.
So what about this element? And all right, so this element also seems important. All right, so you're trying to find the right game. The other factor here that seems to be important in people who end up winning is when you get that gut instinct of, I think I found the right game. Like, it's clicking or whatever, the willingness to push all the chips in. That seems to come up a lot where this is working. Let's really hammer on what's
So to me,
working.
the first thing you do is you have this. Okay, so you haven't been in this industry for 20 years. You just started this thing. You're some kid, or you have this idea for business, and you go, the way that this industry or this product is done or whatever, it's totally wrong. It's just nonsensical how inefficient it is. The first thing you should do is not trust that impulse.
Yeah.
The thing you have thought about for 3 seconds is probably not smarter than all the institutional wisdom and tradition and self-interest operating in that space. So the first thing you have to do is go figure it out. So you're like, hey, I don't know, the way they sell things at convenience stores is dumb and it could be better. Like, you actually have to go spend some time behind the counter at a place, or you have to spend hours and hours watching how it goes. Or, why isn't there a book about this? Well, chances are there's not a book about this because nobody wants a book about that, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And you have to figure out, you have to look for disconfirmation first and foremost that your hunch or hypothesis or, like insight into an established industry or space is not true, because it's probably not true.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a very undervalued step, right?
Yes.
Because especially if you have been successful with other instincts like that in the past, you start to believe you have this Midas touch or this know-it-all syndrome, and that's when you blow up.
Right. Okay. Then I'll add on to that. Also understanding how that world works.
Yes.
Right. So, okay, I think I have a thought about selling things at convenience stores.
Yeah.
Let me find out, why don't people sell it that way?
Yeah.
Also, how does one start a company that like puts stuff in convenience stores?
Yeah.
Like, what's the reality of where those goes are, their margin? Like, I always tell people, for me, the most important, phone call probably in my life is when I decided to write a book. I called a family friend who was an agent and said, explain to me, how do people sell books?
Yeah.
And in particular, what would be the very narrow path that like a 20 or 21-year-old could follow to sell a book? And she was like, this is how the industry actually works.
Yes.
And I don't know how many other, young people, like bright, precocious, or an Ivy League school, like, I'm going to write a book or whatever. And it goes nowhere because you don't do that step either.
Yes.
You're like, I'm just going to, I had this exact conversation with someone. He came to one of my talks and he wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I have my standard advice for writing a book. And he had this whole like alternative world built out about how he was going to end run around the whole. It involved him spending a lot of money on these marketing firms. And these marketing firms were going to get like a lot of attention to his self-published book. And then the publishers were going to come to him and say like, this is so great. And I was like, why would you do all of that? Like, there's a very specific path that works really well. They're desperate for good books, and it's a great like threshold function to see if your idea is good. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, right? So, understanding is this idea really good? Don't trust yourself. How does this world really work? Then I would say like, wait till you have traction. Like, I've made money, I've sold things. So like, okay, like I'm actually playing in this world now.
Yes.
Until I'm playing in the world, I'm not ready to make my big swing probably either, so I think that comes into it as well.
Yep.
But then knowing, because it can be hard to figure out, like, again, I think about your story, like a lot of pieces came together, writing about Stoicism, which, your original decision to do that was not part of some master plan.
No.
And I've told you before, like those of us who knew you back then thought you were crazy.
Yeah, my editor told me later that she thought it would just not work, and then I would go back to doing the other. So my publisher was like, we were just humoring you.
Yeah.
Who I've now sold millions of books on that topic for. So yeah, but it is important. It wasn't a huge bet.
No,
you know what I mean?
But I'm saying that was like one of several elements, right?
Yes.
So it was like that, like, oh, that's kind of working. But there's a couple books and a planner in there before that really established. Moving to Daily Stoic as a separate entity, but then making Daily Stoic around you, visual branding as well. And at some point, those things all started clicking together. And then it's, okay, we're going to do the 4 Cardinal Virtues books. We're going to, really push the studio quality the plays. It was like you push chips in, right?
Yes.
So it's like you're waiting for your moment. I think like Andrew Huberman did something similar.
Yeah.
He was going around doing all these interviews during COVID and was feeling like something here is working. Like something about being
he's realizing
professor.
He's good on camera.
Good on camera.
His things are spreadable.
I have authority, but someone
he's
with
hearing from an audience. Like he's probably getting lots of emails back from people who are like, your thing changed my life.
There's these articles being written about him, and his interviews were blowing up on these big podcasts. And he's like, oh, this works. I'm talking in the way of practical advice, but I'm not just, whatever. Yeah. And so he's like, let's push the chips in on this. Great. Let's this is what I need to do twice a week. Like, let's do this, like do the research and like just put out these episodes and all that sort of takes off too. Or like Lex Fridman realizing like the AI podcast, which he'd been doing forever, forever. He was just interviewing scientists mainly about AI and other technology. And there was this like pandemic moment where he's like, oh, no one's doing anything. Yeah. And if I fly around the country and test myself every day and set up studios and hotel rooms, I could talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And like that was kind of working. Like, let's go all in on that. This is what's working is my interview style, not the fact I'm talking about AI. Anyways, you sort of see this.
Right.
You see this come up. Like, okay, now that something's working, go for it.
Yes. What do you feel like of your advice or strategies? Like, what do you feel like you're the biggest hypocrite about? Like, what do you feel like you struggle actually applying the most?
I think this book, Slow Productivity, is like the most of the books I've written where it's question I have, I want to be better at, like really something I'm really working at. Like when I wrote Deep Work, for example, it was, I came out of this environment, the theory group at MIT, in which like focus was the number one thing. It was like extreme focus. It was, we could stare for hours. And I was like trying to bring this to more like, hey, there's this thing we learned in this narrow world, which is more broadly applicable than we think, right? I was trying to bring this message out there. Digital minimalism. I'd never had a social media account, right?
Right.
And so I was talking about like why you need to be careful about this and how do you build, like I have an intentional relationship with technology. How do you build that too? It's connecting to that. This, I was actually motivated by real problems in my life, right? I mean, I am slow productive, right? I don't like busyness. I do not like having schedules on a regular basis that are packed.
Yeah.
Like a big thing for me is I need work as much as possible to be in a scenario where it makes no difference if you work tomorrow or not. But if you don't work a lot this month, like you're in trouble, right?
No,
that's my sweet spot, right? Yeah. But still, things creep.
Yeah.
And I'm constant tension. So like what pushed me over the edge to writing this book was my 3 boys got all to elementary school age.
Yeah.
And when they got to elementary school age, it swapped to this point where they needed like every minute I had.
Yeah.
Right? Like the tension between work and non-work became less of a pragmatic thing, like, hey, what toddler needs to be taken where, and we make sure everyone's getting a break. And it became more like they need as much time as possible with me. It made that tension really palpable. And so I was like, I really got to clean up my understanding of these intuitions and instincts I have about slowly working towards what matters, because I've accreted a lot of things as I've gotten better and gotten more stature, and the opportunities are everywhere. And I felt like I was in danger of impeding my own progress. So this Slow Productivity is probably the book like I most had myself in mind as a reader. I mean, I do it, but this clarified what I'm trying to do so I could do it much better.
Yeah. The way most people set their lives up, the way sort of business and life is set up, I think we don't maybe compute enough like who gets screwed the most in that system, because the workers are miserable. They're sitting in the cubicle. They're not happy. They're inundated with email.
Yeah.
But like the person who gets the people who get the short end of that stick are children. I was thinking about this. Like I know how I'm able to drop my kids off at school at, like 8:30 or 9 or whatever, and pick them up before like 3 o'clock or whatever. I don't understand how someone with a job could possibly do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane.
Yeah.
Who can work from 9 to 3?
Yeah.
Right. That's not a day. And so what, this is obviously where daycare comes in and nannies come in and in-laws come in, but it's also by definition, a world I think back to my own childhood where I probably saw my parents for like an hour or two a day. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
And
Yep.
then the weekend was like catch up, and obviously they were burned out.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to do stuff, and I wanted to be home because I wasn't home all day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you think about how if you can get what you would call slow productivity, or you might call like an artist life, what's so wonderful about it is the flexibility to be like, oh, my kid is sick. Okay, I'll just spend all day with you today. Or like, you have a half day, I'll pick you up. Let's do that. Like or you run into my office. Yeah, focus is important, and I like to lock in what I'm doing. But I also can turn it on and off if I need to, right?
Yeah.
Because, I'm measuring it not in terms of what did I get done today, or my boss is going to be breathing down my neck, but I measure it in terms of like months or years.
Yeah.
And so like the system of, I don't know what the opposite of slow productivity would be, but like
pseudo productivity.
Yeah,
that's the term I use. Yeah.
But I mean the way like corporate America and life is set up, that the large blocks of hours away from where you live, like focused only on this thing.
Yeah.
The people who suffer from that system the most are children.
Yeah, I agree with that. Right. I mean, and the system, I use the term pseudo productivity because we give it a definition. I always define things. But I think pseudo productivity is using visible activity as a proxy for useful effort.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we did in knowledge work. And we did it because there's no other easy way to measure productivity. In a factory, there's easy ways to do this, right? There's numbers, Model Ts per labor hour. In agriculture, there's ways to do this. Bushels of crop per acre of land.
Yeah.
And you had really clearly defined systems. Oh, I switched from the craft method to the continuous motion assembly line. This Model T per hour number went up by a factor of 10. This is a better way to do it. Knowledge work had none of this, right?
Yeah.
I'm working on 7 things. It's unclear what I'm doing. It's different than what you're doing. You have no idea how I'm organizing my work. That's up to me. So we had no numbers.
Yeah.
So we fell back on pseudo productivity, right? Okay, activity will be our proxy for useful effort. This was okay when it was, we all gather at an office for a set amount of time anyways. And then it was just a game of, don't be seen reading the magazine during the day. But my argument, this is like the first part of the book, is that when we got the front office IT revolution, so especially when we got network computers, portable computing, and then ubiquitous wireless internet, now you had the ability to demonstrate activity on a very fine granularity at all times.
Yeah.
Because you could send an email anywhere.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
You could do a Slack message anywhere. You could jump onto these calls anywhere. You could do your work from home. And that's what put us then into this constant tension between work and everything else. And so, so I think it was pseudo productivity plus digital.
Yeah.
Because I'm a technocritic, so everything kind of comes back to that.
Yeah, sure.
Those two things together is when the wheels begin to spin off the bus. And you can actually see this by looking at business advice literature, like books, like the popular books, right? So in the 80s and 90s, who's like the big name is going to be Stephen Covey, right? So you get 7 Habits, you get First Things First. Read these books. They're very optimistic. They're all about self-actualization. If you've ever read these books, it's like you figure out your roles in life.
Yeah.
And then you're building, there's this optimism of with using these quad charts and priority systems. I'm going to figure out the right things to do that allow me to actualize all the things I care about. What do you get in the early 2000s? David Allen.
Right. How to manage your inboxes or your alerts and all
And not even manage, like survive.
Yeah.
You go back and read David Allen, what you get, what's his goal? Occasional moments of Zen-like peace among the deluge. Mind like there's nothing
turning
in
you
there.
into a processing machine
and a survival processing machine, right? So clearly, the biggest thing afflicting David Allen when he's writing that book is just the sheer overload, and he doesn't even attempt to say, "Let's make work meaningful," like it is with Stephen Covey. Let's not try to actualize our values. It is, can we find a way to be cranking widgets all day without going insane? And his whole methodology is about how to just get stuff out of your mind and on the list so you can just execute blindly off the list and it won't give you stress. Right. It's because what changed between the 90s and the early 2000s, it was email, it was computers, it was like the rise of laptops. And most of the best-selling business advice literature since then, it's like essentialism.
Yeah.
It's one thing. It's deep work, right? It's these books that are all about trying to
go back,
escape overload, get away. And then it's the whole anti-productivity, anti-work movement. This has been the whole literature ever since the early 2000s. So this is what I think happens. If your only definition is more is better than less, and then you give people the opportunity to visibly do work at every moment of their life, those two things don't play well together.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we get this burnout epidemic that just starts in the early 2000s and it just goes. And then the pandemic sort of pushes people over the edge and they're saying enough.
Right. So what's the relationship between productivity and walks? Because I feel like people who are truly productive, not people who sit at their desk and pound at things all day, but I feel like people who have big scientific breakthroughs, artists, people who have theories about the world, whatever, there seems to be an undeniable relationship with walks.
Yeah. Well, they come up all the time, and there's a good neurological reason for it. But first, like where walks become important is once you realize what's important, is like we were talking about before, actually having the valuable idea, like figuring out something good. It's not just writing, which we can use with like scarecrows, is like just doing stuff, right? You actually have to think, right? Walks are really common historically for big thinkers. We think like this, it's not exactly nailed down, but we think what's going on is that the motor neurons involved in walking actually act as a bit of a dampener on certain circuits in your brain, right? So part of your brain now gets into these autonomous motion loops, which acts as a dampener on essentially neural noise. So more distracting thoughts or asides, you're thinking about this or that. So when you're sitting still, sometimes the problem is there's not enough dampening going on in your brain. And so it's hard to sustain your focus. Right. When you're walking, it puts on some cognitive blinders. You have an easier time holding your focus on an interior abstract idea. So it's jerry-rigging your brain to be better at this thing that's pretty artificial for humans to do, which is to hold abstract ideas in our mind's eye. And, this is not what we evolved to do. We're hacking.
We're certainly not evolved to just sit down for long periods of time either, but we are evolved to cover long distances and look for things and explore places.
And take in information while we're walking and process, right? Yeah. So all we're doing different now in the modern world is we're just turning the eye inward.
Yeah.
So instead of taking in information across the savannah and kind of processing all this information, instead we're walking on the river walk and boss drop. Yeah. We can just turn that eye inner and put it on internal things. But yeah, it's the same idea. So walking, it's super common. That's why. I mean, I do all of my best thinking walking.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nietzsche said only ideas had while walking have any worth.
Nietzsche walked a lot.
Yeah. Kierkegaard would walk just hours a day. I mean, Aristotle's school is named after his movements, his walking, right? And so, there is, it's almost inseparable scientific discovery, philosophical discourse, and walking. Even though the irony is, when we think of the philosophers, we think of them standing in the Lyceum or in the school, or we see them stationary. But in fact, they were always in motion. You
read the various dialogues, right? The Aristotelian dialogues, and they're walking. It's Socrates with Phaedrus, and they're walking by the river as they're talking, right? That's the way it unfolds. You know who the champion walker in the arts right now is? David Sedaris.
Or doesn't he walk around and pick up trash?
He does. He will. But these walks he does are epic.
Yeah,
like crazy walks. Like when he's in Manhattan, he'll walk from the Battery all the way up to the Upper West. He'll just walk the whole island or whatever. He'll walk 10, 15 miles.
No, he got an award from the Queen because he would just take these walks, and then he started picking up trash while he was on the walks, which I also do. I live on this dirt road, and so I'll sort of walk it over and over again, and it's there's another nail, or whatever. Sometimes it's not. It's even worse than that. But there's something about, you're doing this thing, so there's not really any expectations that you should be working or that you should have the breakthrough. And perhaps that's where it comes from too, like Archimedes in the bath or whatever. It's when you've turned, it's still operating in the background because you can't turn it off, the thing that's working on the problem. But when you stop being so willful about it, something unlocks, and it's very powerful.
And it comes to you. Yep.
Yes.
Do you also I get this in my town, people think you're eccentric. You probably get it worse here. At least I live in a little town outside of DC, but I walk these same loops through my neighborhood, and they're like, oh, there goes. I mean, they know it now because we're a small enough town.
Yeah.
But people are like, why do you walk so much? I was like, this is what I do for a living. I think
the way that it has intersected with my life is, it's like, okay, so you got to get on the phone with someone for this thing, and I'll send you the invite, and then I don't look at the invite until I'm about to get on, and it's like, oh, this is like a Zoom call with 15 people. I'm already walking. So then now I have to make up this excuse for why it's loud where I am, or that I'm not at my computer. Like, oh, I'm out in the country. And so,
I'm trying to get reception.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, I already didn't want to do this call.
Yeah.
And if you told me that to do this call, I had to sit at my desk for 30 minutes and not move or be outside, I'd want to do it even less, And so yeah, I do almost all my phone calls walking. So sometimes that can be weird in a small town because people are like, oh, hey, I want to talk. And I'm like, but yeah, I try to move. Also, yeah, the only one that caused problems for me is like, if you're doing like therapy or whatever, if you do it over the phone, and it's like, I don't know if I should be talking about this like out in the thing, but I also, again, don't just want to sit there for no reason for an hour. And so, yeah, I think being active and moving, it's first off, it's just better than being sedentary for you physically, and then psychologically and mentally, there's just something very, very powerful.
So we have three. We're going to write a book about this, Ryan. So we have three elements of what we're going to call the artist's life. Now, right? We've discussed three elements, right? So one is the work expectations are tomorrow doesn't matter, but this month does, right? Two, you can be done by 3.
Yes.
And start at 9.
Yeah.
And then the third one is you can spend a lot of time walking.
Yes.
Like that to me, my heart's singing, right? Like that's all I want.
That's a great life.
That's all I want. Yeah. Yeah. Now I do it a little differently because I'm a believer in seasonality.
Okay.
Right. So different seasons being different than others. This is like an old professor thing, right? And so it'll look different for me where this semester might be my teaching semester. So I largely now just teach in one semester.
Yeah.
So, a lot of these days I'm going on the campus and I'm meeting with students, and it's like it's academic life. But then there'll be like another semester when I'm going to campus one day a week and I'm more at my studio and writing. And then the summers we disappear. Yeah. Right. And we often go up to New England. And then it's like I'm completely off the grid. And like the only thing I'm doing is book writing, maybe like some New Yorker work, but probably just book writing. So I lean in the seasonality. So sometimes that's the answer. It's like, well, I still want to be a professor.
Right.
So sometimes it's not all going to be I'm done at 3 or I'm walking a lot, because some days I'm in the classroom and have a meeting with the dean. So why not make that this season of the year and then on bigger time scales too. Like I'm doing book publicity now.
Yeah.
This is not, if I had to operate like this.
Yeah. This is the worst.
It's the worst. It's just, it's fun for like a while because I get to see people, but it's like the worst because it's not this is the fun part. The worst is like my email right now. There must be 7 different teams that all are just like, we need this. Can you do this? Can you get back to me on this? There's
it starts to feel like it's probably for you a glimpse of what regular life is for a lot of people.
I think if you're like a higher level executive that like a lot of people needed things from, it probably feels like book tour all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the seasonality thing is interesting, and it's probably a throwback to an older way of life. It's like politicians, the Washington would clear out during the summer because it was a malarial swamp or whatever, right? Or school, has always sort of been in the seasons, but people used to do things that way. Whereas now, and I find myself doing it, I am much more of a like, well, what does my ideal day look like? And I'm just going to do that all the time. But there is probably something unrealistic and unnatural about doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and not having large chunks of time where you're doing it differently and you're forced to re-examine and question and try it a new way in a new place. And so I am trying, especially as my kids are getting older, and now, hey, this is the season we're in school. So if I had some idea that like I don't do meetings on Friday and I'm going to stay at home, well, that was great when they were 2. Yeah. Because they were around, but now they're gone all day. So I might as well go. I might as well. So yeah, I think the rhythms of, this is baseball season, and then the rhythms of this is the winter, and not only are the hours shorter, but we're all sick all the time. Yeah. So the hell with your plans. You know what I mean? The season of accepting that instead of having a routine, you have a series of routines, and you rotate either seasonally or day to day or different days of the week. through which one makes the most sense.
So I had a couple of weeks ago a New York Times op-ed on this idea, like on seasonality. And one of the things I was arguing is this is so valuable to humans, right? It's because it's the way we lived until, evolutionary speaking, like a blink ago.
This is when we're farming. This is when we hunt the buffalo.
And I went back to all that. Like, it's all over the place. I wrote a long New Yorker piece about this last year too, where I looked at what do we know about hunter-gatherers and like what work looked like for them. It's important enough that it's worth sacrifices as well.
Yeah.
So like, here's something I'm considering. Because I'm not, my podcast is not with a network. We still sell ads, directly with an agency, and you sell ads, as you know, like a year in advance. Basically, you fill out the year ahead. Yeah. So I'm thinking about for the next year, talking, you know my agency. Yeah. I hope they're not listening, but saying,
I still work with them. They're great.
Yeah, they're great. But I'm thinking about saying, let's not sell 52 weeks, right? In fact, let's take, why don't we sell like 45 or 46 weeks? And I am going, because I'm not going to podcast in July.
And why don't you just batch the production and sell all year round?
Well, I could do that too, but then that's also more like, this is what I mean by because I was thinking about this. I was like, well, what would happen if I just said we're going to take 6 weeks off or 2 months off, no batching, just like the show's on hiatus there. I was like, okay, what does happen? Well, it's less money.
Yeah.
But I like, this might be a fair trade though.
No, I do like that because I tend to do the batching thing.
It's a signal as well to myself, right? Of like, hey, wait a second. This is so important to me to unwind. I'm willing to, we're giving up money to do this. Yeah. And then it becomes a brand signal. Like, hey, I actually take the time, there's a whole way to make it work.
I'm struggling with this right now. Like, this has like been a very, very crazy week for me. I think we did like 8 interviews, and then I have a bunch next week, and then I have meetings. I have a bunch of stuff.
So you're batching ahead with interviews?
No, I didn't think I was, but I was like, why is this so crazy? And then I realized the reason it's so crazy, first off, it's something that's outside of my control, which is it's South by Southwest in Austin. So a bunch of people are here. Right. So that like, they were just like, this is the only time they can do it in person. But then I realized really what's happening is I'm going out of town for like 10 days for my kids' spring break. So what happened is I took 10 days off the calendar. Yeah. So it just moved that stuff this way or that way. Yep. And so you like we went out of town for a month this summer, and it was great. But then I was like, why was it not as relaxing as I thought it would be? And it's because I didn't just continue on with my normal schedule, and then there was a month gap, and then I continued on with my normal schedule. Yeah. It was all the things that had to happen while I was not doing the things for a month basically just made the preceding month and the proceeding month more stressful than it needed to be. And it might have been a wash, right? And so the idea of like, no. Like it's more like the rapture. Like I just go to the thing and then I disappear and then maybe I'll come back.
So that's real. I'm inventing this term now, but real seasonality versus fake seasonality. Yes. It's fake seasonality if during this period I'm doing less work, but that work all still got done. Yes. We just moved it or whatever. Real seasonality is we know Ryan disappears like for this month.
Yeah. Like can't go outside, it's raining. That's real seasonality.
We've known that for a year in advance. Yeah. Like just we've been booking the schedule, we just, book around it. I figured this out as an academic. So if you had a research institution as a professor, the university does not pay your salary in the summer. They pay you 10 months salary. Yeah. Like your contract.
But can you pick your paychecks to like, my mom was a teacher. They were like, do you want 12 months of paychecks or do you want 10 months of paychecks? But it's the same salary.
So no one does that because what you do instead, if you're a researcher, is you put in what's called summer salary into your research grants. So you fill in those 2 months. Now it's like the National Science Foundation or DARPA is paying it because you're like, I should be working on research in the summer. And so that's what people do, right? So now you're taking your summer salary comes in, from a grant or something like this. And then what people think is like, okay, but I still want to take vacations or this or that, but I am on the hook to keep working. Yeah. So they have to do fake seasonality, right? Yeah. And then at some point I figured out you don't have to do that. Yeah. Like what if you just say, I'm not taking summer salary from a grant. As far as the university is concerned, you're not their employee in those 2 months. Like there's nothing for you to do. They can't ask you to do anything. Like you're gone or whatever. And I figured out at some point, like, why not just, I write books. Like, wouldn't that be a good use of part of a book advance is to cover the summer? And like this was and that was real seasonality versus fake. I was doing fake before, which is summers are more flexible. Because I don't have to teach and we can go travel and like do things, but also like I'm working and I have to write these reports or this or that. When I went to real seasonality, like, no, I'm taking a sacrifice. I'm losing money, but I owe nothing to no one during this time. It really changed the character. That's why I wanted make the podcast be protected in the summer as well. So
Yeah,
it's just we
that's
know
smart.
we just know in advance. Like
That takes a couple
I
br-
completely shut down.
Yeah, I think your tricky part is going to be audiences are not seasonal. I mean, you are on TV shows, right? And that you're like, whatever.
Yeah.
But if a thing is more like a daily or a weekly habit, breaking that habit is hard. So
Yeah, but here's my thought on. I thought about that.
Yeah.
So this is why podcasting I think is okay.
Yeah.
Because podcasting doesn't. It's push not pull, right? So
Yeah.
like, why do I listen to like Cal's podcast? Like I like it, and I see it come up in my list of new
Yeah.
episodes, and I listen
Yeah.
to it. All right, you go away for 6 weeks. It's not showing up in their list. You come back, it just shows up again. They're already subscribed to the show, right? And when it comes back again, like, oh yeah, I like listening to Cal's show, right? Like it's
Sort
not
of.
that hard for them to get the habit back.
that's not how algorithms work, right? And that's also
but
not.
it's podcasting. There's no algorithms in podcasting.
Oh, there absolutely is, and there's also
You're thinking YouTube. Maybe.
No. There's definitely algorithms. So what gets suggested in your things, and did your downloads take a hit earlier this year?
Probably.
As all shows did.
Yeah.
So what happened is Apple started
this happened
recalculating
in the fall,
how,
right?
how they calculate episodes. So the point is, even if it's not totally true now, it's definitely going to become in the past. Is that like it's gonna when you stop listening to a thing, that's a reinforcing habit algorithmically, and then also when you do things. So I think the
You're raining on my parade, Ryan.
The recurring is great, but anyways, that I would say though, the thing I struggle with, I wonder if you struggle with this too. The hard part, the decision to do seasonality. Like when I was like, I'm going to take a month, I'm just going to hang out. Only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write, maybe an hour or so a day, just working on this project. But that's I love doing it. I'm only doing the things I love to do. But then, so I take this month off the calendar, and then, my speaking agent calls a couple weeks before, and he goes, hey, you got this offer to do this talk in Boston, smack in the middle of it. You can be in and out in one day. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be like, I said I'm not going to do anything, so I'm not going to do anything. And then, he's like, okay, I told him this. And then they doubled the offer or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's now the most I've ever been offered to a thing. And I decided to stick with it, to not do it. But now I'm like going like, not only was I already paying for this vacation, but now this is the most expensive vacation that I've ever taken in my life. We could have, you know what I mean? We could have gone on like a round the world trip first class for what I, So the decision to be seasonal, I think it's easier when there's norms about it. When everyone leaves for the summer, when everyone in Gilded Age New York gets in their trains and goes in different directions, that's easy. But then when you're the only one doing it, then you are actually having to calculate what that thing is costing you. I mean, and that's very painful.
It is. I mean, I have this, my speaking agency knows this now.
Yeah.
I don't like to do things in the summer.
Okay.
I mean, I completely frustrate them.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think from their perspective this is money on the table, and it's like really big money. And why not just, we can get you in and out same day, or it's like going overnight or whatever. But the unpolluted seasonality, I don't know, there's an advantage to that, right? Because there's the
Does
signal.
it take you a lot of discipline to enforce that, or
Yes.
for you is it
It's
just kind
socially
of
difficult.
naturally?
It's socially difficult, especially with like agents. Be like, I'm not going to do it.
Is it so socially difficult is one thing. Is it difficult for you personally to like? Would you rather do it?
No, I don't like doing things.
Okay.
Yeah. All I want to do, honestly, like what am I wired to do is to like be in a cabin or on the beach writing. And what I would be optimal set for is like the once a year novelist.
Yeah.
Come back at the end of this year with a novel.
That's also a great seasonality, sure.
And we will we're going to leave you alone till like novelists have this figured out. It's the only industry I can discover where there's no expectation. In fact, the expectation is you do nothing else. Novelists don't start they don't podcast a lot. They do sometimes. They don't have if you're John Grisham, like they'll say it's completely
about
fine.
novelists instead of when you're actually referring to like 10 novelists.
Basically all literary novelists, right? So
but you're referring to the industry as if that's
Successful
not like
novelists.
7 people who are at that level.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, let's say if you got to our level of success in novels,
sure.
okay, to make it comparable,
Okay, yes.
it would be completely understood if
wouldn't
we
do anything
disappeared before publicity choice. Like not everyone does it, but it's a complete, like I wrote this article once looking at Crichton versus Grisham because they were doing similar types of novels. And Crichton went like the maximalist route.
Yeah.
I want to do TV. I want to do scripts. I want to direct. I moved to Hollywood. And Grisham went the other way. This is great. I can quit my job. I can disappear. I'll do 3 weeks of publicity a year. I don't even have a team.
Yeah.
You have like one assistant. And then when
I did marketing for one of his books.
Yeah. And then when she retired, he was like, I don't need anyone else because only my agent and my editor ever call me, and they call me like this time of year when I tell them what I'm writing, right? And he went that way with it, and that's people are like, that's fine.
Yeah,
like it's completely fine, right? It's the only where if you or I said like, okay, I'll be back in 2 years with my book, like it just doesn't happen as much in nonfiction, and certainly not in like a lot of other jobs as well. But there it's normalized because there's this this belief that came from literary novelists of this is not going to be good enough to win the award if anything pollutes me. This is like Dave Eggers writes on the non-internet connected laptop and disappears. And it's because it came out of that belief of you can't create this art. And if it's not art, then it's not going to, if it's not great and doesn't get the National Book Award, then why did we pay so much for Jonathan Franzen's latest book? Right. And so they had this idea of like, yeah, please just disappear and do what you do. But very few fields have normalized that.
Yes, that's right. But I think what they all have in common ultimately is to be able to pull any of that off is leverage, which you talk about in So Good They Can't Ignore. You have to have leverage. Like you have to have the goods, you have to have the audience,
you have to write the firm,
confidence, and you have to. And so, whether you're a salesman who wants to be the only remote employee for your company, or you want to be the author who takes a bunch of, weeks off during the year, months off during the year, or, whatever it is, no one's going to give it to you.
Yes.
You have to take it.
Yes.
And demand it. And then you have to have the leverage to be able to make it worth doing.
That's why I say the obsession over quality piece of slow productivity is the glue.
Yeah.
Because it gives you two different things that both reinforce slowness. So like one, as we talked about, as you obsess more about quality, slowness, by which we're saying here like lack of busyness, becomes like really natural, right? So like once you get more obsessed with doing something really well, the more all the other stuff begins to feel almost like morally bankrupt. You just instinctually want to have less busyness. And then the second piece is as you do something really well, you get the leverage.
Yeah.
You get the leverage to be able to actually demand and get slowness. And that's why the story I thought captured both sides of that in the book was the singer Jewel.
Yes.
Because I said she did both, right? Yeah. So when she was coming up, she was this weird, really talented singer because she had grown up, yodeling with her family troupe in rural Alaska and had this weird vocal control, and then went to this Interlochen, which is like this really good art school in Michigan. So she had the goods, but she was singing at a coffee shop, living out of her car or whatever. And these record executives discovered her. She is very, very good. So they go to sign her and they put $1 million on the table eventually. Right. Yeah. And she turns down the signing bonus because, she's like,
I was going to bring up the story when you were talking about talking to that agent when you were a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So she turns down the $1 million signing bonus because she's like, it's going to take me time to figure out how to translate this into like a fully established singer-songwriter who can make a lot of records. And if they give me $1 million bonus, they're going to want to make that back, which means I have to have a hit record in the first, like, whatever many months, and I'm not going to. And she didn't. Like, the Pieces of Me at first wasn't working, right? So her desire to be really good, she said, I'm going to choose a slower trajectory in the music. Yeah. No big signing bonus. This will give me a multi-year runway.
Yeah.
And then she was I'm going to be very cheap for you, right? No tour bus. I'm going to drive my own car.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to cost you nothing. Because her desire to be really good meant she's like, I have to slow down.
Yeah.
Then once she got really good, she went on one of those Taylor Swift style international tours, started doing Hollywood stuff. She was in an Ang Lee movie. All of her people were saying, this is the plan.
Yeah.
You're going to move to Hollywood. Yeah. We're going to do movies in between international tours. She's like, well, wait a second. I have a lot of money and I'm really good.
Yeah.
And she said, no tour, never did another international tour. Wow. Never did another movie. Went Texas, actually. Yeah. She was her boyfriend at the time was a rodeo rider. Huh. Came out to his ranch at Texas. She's like, I want to just write music and do albums. And like, I don't. So the quest for quality slowed her down. She turned down the $1 million, went on to make more than $200 million after that. We know that because her mom stole $200 million from her. So that's a whole other story. And then once she did get good, she used that to slow down her life too. So you get this sort of like double-edged virtue for obsessing over quality.
Yeah, I feel like, on the one hand, I was very unlucky in that the obstacles away, which has sold a very large amount of copies. I only got a small advance for it. Like, as we were saying, my publisher thought it was a crazy idea.
Yeah.
My first marketing book had come out. I got in a big advance and it had done okay, but I got less than half for that book, for a book that ultimately sold millions of copies. So one argument would be I should have gotten a much higher advance, right? But since they didn't really believe in it, but I did, I took the smaller advance. But when it came out, it did okay. You know, they were like, sure, you want to do another one? And I did another one. And so now I'm 3 or 4 books in with the same publisher. We have a long-standing relationship. I'm not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. The book's able to develop. I'm able to sell all my books. So I've been able to do I mean, what are you at, 4 with portfolio? 5? How many have you done there?
That's a good question. It was minimalism. Email's my 3rd with them.
Yeah. So which is unusual in and of itself. I've done 12, 13. Yeah. Nobody does that in publishing because you're always chasing the next deal, which you think is you cashing in your leverage. Yeah. But actually, someone else is getting leverage over you. Yeah. Because they're not giving you a large advance because you're awesome. They're giving you a large advance because they think they're going to make it back. And as soon as they give it to you, they want to start making it back. Yeah. And so yeah, sometimes the thing that feels like financially actually wasn't a great move is from a lifestyle and a freedom and a development standpoint, absolutely the right thing to do. And then in the end, the same financially.
Well, I always point to your example for this. Like, you're the person I know most who says, who cares about the advance? Yeah. Like, it's just a loan on, basically on earnings. You're going to make the same money regardless. Yeah. And I've gone back and forth on it. Like,
I do too. Like, I definitely don't try to get smaller advances.
I think it doesn't, like, the thing that does matter, though, I learned, is it also dictates the energy they put into a book. So I began seeing the advances a little bit as a scorecard. Like, if they spend this much, then their marketing budget is X, and if it's this much, but I think that's starting to get in the weeds a little bit, right?
Yeah, But the point is, if she had taken $1 million advance, she wouldn't have been able to have a one album that did okay and then do another album. Yeah. They'd be like, they're already writing her off on their books.
Exactly.
And so the fact that the obstacles away sold 3,700 copies its first week, which is not terrible. Yeah. But it wouldn't have predicted where it ended up. Yeah. But they didn't cut bait on it because for what they'd given the advance on, they're like, this is okay. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Managing expectations is an important part of it too.
Deep Work was the same way, you know. Deep Work. So the book before Deep Work, So Good They Can't Ignore You, didn't live up to their expectations at first. Reduced the advance. Yeah, for Deep Work.
Sure, but then
and I was like, all right, I guess fair enough, right? And so like, let's just do this. Like, let's just roll. Like, I think this book is good. Like, let's get that going. And then when Deep Work was first coming out, because it was a lower advance, they weren't doing a ton. They were doing like what was reasonable. There was nothing bad happening here. They were doing what was reasonable for that level. And I was complaining. I still remember this call to my agent. I was like, nothing's happening with this book. My friends, like, parents went to Barnes and Noble. They didn't even have it in stock. Like, this is a great idea. And she's like, they don't budget money based on ideas. Right. They have a model. What can it do? And she's like, look, you gotta just do the work. And so like, I was like, okay, great. That so touched me. I was like, I'm just going to put my head down and like keep trying to get better. And so then I started doing, I got my writing for my newsletter, and then podcast emerged as a thing. And I was like doing all the just doing podcasts, early podcasts. And that book also millions of copies later.
And then you're saying it was so good that they couldn't ignore it.
It was so good they couldn't ignore it. And ironically, Deep Work doing well pulled So Good They Can't Ignore You up to be like a very good seller. None of those books were bestsellers though.
That's funny.
Yeah.